Welcome to Let's Get Into It. I am your host, Sherelle Higgins. Let's Get Into It is a safe space to have real conversations that are meant to uplift, encourage, and let you know you are not the only one dealing with life. Each episode of Let's Get Into It is designed to provide illuminating and thought-provoking information on a variety of topics. In fact, no topic is off limit. If you would like to see a topic discussed, please feel free to make a recommendation. My special guest and I will have a great time discussing topics that the mainstream media wouldn't dare discuss. We will bring these conversations to you with an open mind, respectfully, from different perspectives, and most importantly, with love. Thank you for joining me and my special guest. Now, let's get into it. Hello, and welcome back to Let's Get Into It. I am your host, Sherelle Higgins. I have taken a couple shows off because it's the holiday season, and you know how that goes. The last one was supposed to be on Thanksgiving, and I was too busy watching my Bears get dog walked up and down the field. And so there was no way I was going to be able to do a podcast after that. And this is the last podcast of the year. And I have some great shows lined up for you starting in 2025. So please plan to join me in 2025 as we get into it. And for today's episode, I am excited that we are going to have a conversation about this topic. The topic is Black history. And I have two amazing authors who are going to join me in talking about Black history. But there's a spin on the story of Black history with these two. And so I want to make sure that you understand our Black history. And so first I'm going to bring to the stage Hoke Glover III. And Hoke is a poet. He is also known as Dr. Yao. He is a poet and nonfiction writer living in Lanham, Maryland. He teaches at Bowie State University, one time for the HBCU, in the Department of Language, Literature, and Cultural Studies. Prior to that, he founded and co-owned Caribou Books, an African-American bookstore chain that operated in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. His work has been published in several journals. He has written 2 books of poetry. He is also the co-author of the book that we are going to talk about today, Crazy as Hell, The Best Little Guide to Black History. Also, he is currently working on a book of essays called The Wuhan Soundtrack, which combines memoir and essays that map synergies between Chinese yin culture and African American culture. So thank you for joining me, Hope, and welcome to Let's Get Into It.
Yeah. Thank you, Sherelle. Let's get into it. Yeah.
I will also like to bring to the stage Dr. V. Dr. V is an educator who explores critical aspects of African American women's historical relationship to home, family, work, and the dynamics of Black family life. She is the author of 4 books and numerous other scholarly and creative works. She is also the co-author of Crazy as Hell. And so, welcome, Dr. V.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So I absolutely love the title Crazy as Hell. I wasn't sure what to expect when I read the book, but Crazy as Hell is a great topic. And I think as we move forward into 2025, we're going to be saying to ourselves, not only is this world crazy as hell, but we're going to also be saying, what the hell? And so it is it to happen that way. So welcome, welcome, welcome. I appreciate you all agreeing to be on the show to talk about your book. As I stated, I read the book. It was an easy read. It was, I read it in just a couple hours in one sitting. And so I was pleasantly surprised about reading it. I'm not necessarily a history buff. And so when I got the book, I was like, okay, oh God, what's this gonna be? And
There
I
it is.
was really surprised. It was a page turner.
There it is. Yeah.
And so the first question for you all, can you tell the audience where you're from? Hoke.
Yeah. I'm from Lanham, Maryland, right behind Seabrook Elementary. Raised in PG County, born in New York, but I probably spent most of my life in a 5-mile radius, which is right around there in PG County. And I work at Bowie, which is only a little bit outside of that. Yep.
Oh, okay. And Dr. V, where are you from?
Well, I was born in Washington, D.C., but I was raised in Bowie, Maryland. I went to Bowie High School, but I moved quite a bit before coming back to Maryland. I work in Detroit at Wayne State University, but I live in Silver Spring, Maryland.
Okay. I was born and raised in the city of Chicago, South Side. However, I've been in Virginia for 40 years, and the people try to tell me I'm not from Chicago no more, but I'm like, yes, I am. I'm still from Chicago. All my family still live there.
That explains the Bears, the Chicago Bears.
Yeah, I know. I was wondering about that too. Yeah.
Absolutely. Every week. I talk big trash, knowing that they're not going to win, but don't tell the people that's listening, because every week after we win the game, I put on social media that we won the game, because I figure if they can believe everything number 47 would say, they can believe what I say.
That's hilarious.
Right.
So that's just
alternative fact. That's all.
Right. So that's how I've been rolling since 47 been around.
I hear that. Yeah, that's good. That's good.
So how did the two of you all connect?
Well, we met. I met Hoke when I joined faculty at Bowie State University. So we both were teaching in the same department, and he was the founder of that famous bookstore, and we worked on the same hall, and so it was that's where we met. Yeah.
Okay. And Hoke, what made you all want to collaborate on this book?
Well, when Valerie first came to Bowie, and Bowie has this real interesting sort of creative writing history. They're only about 25, I think initially, it may be like 12 or 15, but Ethelbert Miller had generated all of these creative writing programs at HBCUs. But one of the things about HBCUs is we usually don't get the top scholars. And I know that, that might be a slight to some people. But when Dr. Prince came to Bowie, she had published a book called Burning Down the House with Columbia University Press. So I got a chance to read the book. Then later on, another author who folks might want to check out, Rion Scott, was here at Bowie. And he's done really great work, but he spent about 10 years here. So it's just the type of thing where, the benefit of a university is that you get a chance to interact with brilliant minds. And we were really lucky to have somebody like Dr. Prince sort of come through here, because Columbia University Press usually leads you to the PWI. So we just sort of connected and gelled. And we just done a whole lot of work over the last, almost 15 years. It's just like deeply, intellectual. So, Bowie was lucky to have a professor like her, because now she's a full professor at Wayne State, and she's got a lot of books under her belt, but, she happened to flash through, our tiny little home. And so, we made the connection and it stayed that way. Yep.
Okay. And Dr. V, what sparked your interest in Black history?
Well, I went to an HBCU. I graduated from Hampton, but let me back up a bit. I graduated from Bowie High School, and at the time I was a student, Bowie High School was predominantly white. There might have been 7% Black people, In my household, there was always an interest in Black culture, Black things. My parents were always very clear about who we were. And in the context of Bowie High School, it was a very hostile environment. So that by the time I graduated, there was no question in my mind I was going to an HBCU. I applied to one school, and that's where I went. I went to Hampton. And as a student, I just loved literature. I just loved reading. And I would read anything and everything. But when I got to certain books, they just spoke to me. And like, I just remember one story in particular when I got to James Baldwin's Sonny's Blues. And I was really interested in Stephen Crane. I was interested in Hemingway. I was interested in all these other things. But then when I got to Sonny's Blues, I was like, no, this is what I'm going to do. And it just was so clear that the rhythms, the sounds, the images, all of the things that are connected with the way that we inhabit and occupy the world, it just spoke to me. So from that time forward, I have immersed myself in African American history and culture and literature and all of those things.
Okay, and good thing you don't live in Florida. Hoke, what sparked your interest in it?
Yeah, well, I came from the traumatized household. I think everybody did. So I can flip that like two ways. I mean, I can tell you how great my mama and my daddy were and where I grew up. But I could also tell you how jacked up it is. It depends upon the day. And so my mom and my dad had a library in the house. And
did they have encyclopedias?
Oh yeah. Okay. I was heavy on the encyclopedia jump, I mean, I was that nerd kid. Remember the book they had, Encyclopedia Brown? I always connected with that. Yeah, because I was just like, I want to be that dude, And so they had this library. And then probably when I got about 16 and I got a little, I guess what most folks would call radical, I started reading their library. And it just fascinated me that, I went to DeMatha and always went to private school. It just fascinated me that so many of the things that were in the books in the house were not in the classrooms that I went to. And then, I'm doing my elementary logic, which is like, I'm supposed to be going to a good school. So like, how in the hell is it that I'm going to a good school, but then this knowledge that my parents have is not in the curriculum? Mm-hmm. So I just read all their books. And then I walked around school a lot, shouting out weird facts and quoting Malcolm X and getting on people's nerves and screaming on the administration and all the usual wannabe activist stuff, And then that led to Caribou books years later, and so I've always been a student of Black history. And with this book, that's part of the thing is that, we have scholars in the community who create books. But really for me, my contribution to this book is a 40-year journey into Black history where I just remember all these crazy as hell facts. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's really just that simple. So like the King instance where, like when I read that King tried to commit suicide, just like, really? Like, why ain't nobody tell me that? Or like when Huey dies, from a crack deal gone bad. Just like, I mean, like, it's almost like it's about the omissions from the sort of public narrative in the way we talk about the history. And you're studying the history, you read so many books over years, over decades. And for me, I'm in search of like, I mean, why my parents be like, yo, what's up with the white people? Like, I didn't understand that as a kid. I'm like, why you say what's up with the white people, but then you send me to school with the white people? So that's like a Black history riddle, Black history code. So I'm trying to figure that out, and I'm reading the history, and all these things don't reconcile. And then Crazy as Hell is a way to sort of reconcile all of these different facts that, I encountered over all these years studying Black history.
Okay. And how did you all come up with the name Crazy as Hell? I love that.
Well, we were playing around with tones. And so we had been thinking about form and how you communicate in a way that people can relate and people can understand. And really, we spend all this time in classrooms and reading all these books. And if people don't want to hear it or don't want to read it, if it's not accessible to them or if it offends them, then what good is it? So we were like, okay, how do we really talk? And Hoke has this blog he had been doing for years, and he's written extensively on this blog. I've contributed quite a bit, but he has like 40 different people, scholars, poets, all kinds of people have contributed to this blog. Got at least 500,000 views. And it's where we're trying to play out these ideas. And one of the things that was real clear to us is that when you try and communicate something within our culture, you have to get the tones right. So when we decided, okay, we want to deal with Black history, but then we were like listening or thinking about the things that we were trying to say. And we were like, that's crazy as hell. And then we would get to another thing we were trying to communicate. And then we're like, that's crazy as hell. But it was a different tone. And then we got to, and it was like, that's it. It's about the tones and how the inflection informs the meaning.
Mm.
So it was just kind of a natural coming together of, if we're trying to write a thing, trying to write it in the way that we say and we think about it amongst ourselves, and then to capture what we really think, because there's something irreverent. We usually, when we think about Black history, we're so solemn. It's irreverent. I mean, some of the first people we sent the draft to, like I remember one guy in particular, we sent it to him. He read through it and he gave me this big list of words. They were all like $5 words. He was trying to tell us what all we had done. And then I stopped. I was like, did you find anything in it humorous? And he was like, I did, but I didn't know that I could laugh. So he didn't feel, because it's Black history, it's so somber. But when we are not reading a book, when we're talking amongst ourselves in the barbershops or the salons or somewhere on the corner, when we're just having a conversation, over a table with drinks, we're saying what, people are actually thinking, which is sometimes if you were Harriet Tubman's friend, mm-hmm. and Harriet Tubman got herself from the Eastern Shore of Maryland up to Philadelphia, and then she's telling you, I'm about to go back, and you her friend, what you gonna say to her?
You crazy as hell.
Exactly.
And so we were like,
you're gonna say, what the hell?
Yeah, exactly.
She's like, so we were like, let's just be real about it.
I love that. I love that explanation, because as you were talking, I don't typically watch a lot of TV, particularly as it relates to like series, shows that come on every week or whenever they decide to drop them. But one show, a friend of mine turned me and my husband on to, and that particular show did exactly what you are talking about, Dr. V. They talk like we talk, right? And from the very first episode, I was hooked, and we just binge watched it. And each season had like 20 something shows, and we just binge watched it until we finished. And that show is The Oval, one of Tyler Perry's shows. And it has all kind of craziness going on in the show, but they actually talk like we talk. And I think that that's an important point, particularly when you're trying to draw people in. And so one of the things I found fascinating about the book is that it wasn't just about who we traditionally think about when we think about Black history. It certainly talked about some of those people, right? Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass. It had some of those characters in there, but it took an interesting spin for me when you all started talking about somebody who's very well known in the DMV area, Rayful Edmonds. And even though I knew his story, I still wanted to read how you all captured that. And when we think about Black history, we always think about things that happened so long ago. We don't necessarily think about the current contributions to Black history and how those contributions will be written into the history books, right? And so when I saw Rayful Edmonds' name in there, I was like, oh, okay. It made me sit up. Let me look at this a little closer and pay attention, right? So I really loved that about the book. And I think that people who are going to read the book will also find some of the people that you all mentioned very shocking, because again, we typically, when we read about, Black history, when we were freed or so-called freed, Harriet Tubman, you got your Ida B. Wells and your Susan B. Anthony, all these people, right? But you all decided to include others that are not typically going to be included. So how did you arrive there? How did you know you wanted to add some current people to the book?
Yeah, well, my uncle, his name is Jap. He out of Nashville, Tennessee, and he was a number runner, in the 50s, and they called him Jap because it was right after World War II, and they were like, he was as mean as the Japanese, and so they called him Jap. So at least in my personal history, it's like he's a mythic character. Pistol whip a couple of people, shot some people, and again, he's part of this history that exists in our family, and every city has that. The gangsters and the number runners, Bumpy Johnson, you got Harlem Nights, you got all that. That's an active part of Black history. And then when you get to hip hop, in particular, hip hop is always pivoting on that. I mean, it's like, and again, I think you spoke about it, which is every time somebody goes to talk about Black history, it's like where they go to school, which white people, and who they writing for. Whereas the underground history, like in our bookstore, I think it was Don Diva, which was like an underground magazine that was really just for like hustlers and gangsters. And so Black history is so diverse and so complicated that in some ways the record of Black history is really controlled by the people that go to study with white people and then are building these careers about being legitimate sort of scholars. And so part of our thing, and we get at it with the archetypes, is like, again, when you get to a free Black space, the barbershop or the salon, just because you went to study with some white folks and got a degree doesn't mean that you're the authority on the history within the context of the community. And we're probably not the best at that. Like, I mean, we got them degrees, so we got exported off to England or whatever and did that work and then came back. But that's the whole point, is that it's almost Christmas. We right in between. I mean, what are people really talking about when they sit down and eat the turkey, and who's there and what they drinking and how are they swinging it? And to act like that's not part of Black history, like Black history is only this other documented record. Part of what we're trying to do is blur that up. And our hope is that more people will get a sense of that freedom, same way Street Life books were. So, I mean, it's like, it's not just one Street Life book, 10 Street, it's hundreds, if not thousands of them. And so this is a whole new way that we can start to approach our history and sort of add to this collective knowledge. I mean, that's what we're trying to get at.
Yeah, and I love the way you all broke the book down in sections and titled those sections. And one of the things you just kind of mentioned, Hope, was about the hustlers and the drug dealers, right? Because they are really contributing to our history. And so having grown up in the 70s on the south side of Chicago, we knew lots of drug dealers.
Who do we leave out?
Oh, my goodness. We can talk about Larry Hoover.
Yeah, Larry Hoover.
When you start talking about gangbangers, hustlers, you can
yeah.
Ford. My Uncle Jesse.
There it is. That's a crazy as hell moment. Yep. Bring it home. That's the whole point. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, the Mayor Washington, that we had in Chicago. And so, there's so many people. And, when you think about their contributions, right? Not only, there's a pro and a con to everything, right? And so while I don't necessarily agree with, drug dealers selling drugs to their own communities, decimating their communities, but I understand how they got there, right? And I also understand that in some instances in their minds, they're thinking that they're putting on other people who look like them to elevate them out of the situation that they're in. And so I had not thought about that group of people from a Black history standpoint prior to reading the book.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so so that's why I really got into the book, and I was just turning the pages because I was like, oh, this is good. This is really good. And then
I think that point that you're making is so important, because part of what happens when other people are telling our history is that they are making us seem dysfunctional. But you just said, I understand how they got there. It's not about a morality. We're not assigning a morality. We're not condemning the people. We don't think that people should sell drugs, obviously. We don't feel safe when people are, gangbanging down the street or outside our doors. We don't want that. But at the same time, we're not assigning them as some inherent dysfunction. Right. There's a reason why they're there. And so when we start thinking about Black history, we're not trying to exclude, and we're not trying to sanitize, and we're not trying to make it seem like we are
exclusive.
Exclusive, like we're like refined. We're not trying to clean us up. There's nothing wrong with us.
Right.
We're just trying to represent and depict who we are as a people in our complexities.
Yes, and the different categories that you all chose, I thought were very, very interesting, because you had the category of deadbeat dads, and I was tickled when I got there because I was like, I contributed to Black history.
We didn't expect that to get as much. That's the one that everybody hits on, and people hit it one way and they hit it the other way. Some people, it's like and then we even have people getting mad, but for different reasons. So we didn't anticipate that.
Well, that section I thought was great. I thought that topic was brilliant, and I think it's something that we should discuss more in our communities. What can we do to ensure that if you make a baby, you take care of your baby, whether you are with the mother or not? We have to have those conversations, because I don't think that our single mother households are any different than other ethnic groups. However, I'm not concerned about those other ethnic groups. I'm only concerned about my people. And I think, we have to, as a community, we have to have that conversation and really try to get to the bottom of why a man or a woman would walk away from their kids and not want to be actively involved in their lives. I think that's just an important conversation. And maybe I'll have a podcast if I can get some fathers who have done that or found themselves in that situation to tell us what their particular experience is about, because that is certainly a conversation we need to have. Also, you talked about John Henry, and I found that fascinating because my husband's family is from West Virginia, and we go to the John Henry Parade on a regular basis.
Oh, really? I never heard of that. What is it?
Every year in Talcott, West Virginia, right outside of White Sulphur Spring, they have a John Henry Day, and during John Henry Day, they have this parade. And so to, remember him. And so my in-laws They, still live in West Virginia. They have 200 acres of land up in West Virginia, so they are active participants in the parade. And so when I saw John Henry in there, I was like, oh, okay, I know a little something about John Henry. Now, mind you, we're in Talcott, West Virginia, so it ain't that big, and the parade is not that big either. And so we get lots of kick out of seeing, the 3 cars and the 4 horses. It's
wow. Yeah, you got to give us a date. We might try and show up for that.
That would be fun.
Yeah, that's usually in July.
In July, okay, and I know Beth would love to show up for that. Yeah.
Yes, John Henry Day. They always celebrate that. So I thought that was interesting and could immediately connect to that. And for our audience members who don't know about John Henry, he worked in the coal mine. And so my husband's mother is the daughter of a coal miner. And so they grew up all around John Henry and the coal mining and all of that good stuff. So I thought that was, I immediately connected to that. Also, you talked about, I wrote this down, and I forget which section this was in, but this I wrote down said, Mammy cook and clean better than anyone. In the end, the slave, nigger, and Mammy are the greatest pieces of art white folks ever created. That's powerful. That is really powerful. And again, just another way about thinking about things. I like to, look at things from different perspectives. And that statement right there to me just kind of sums it up, right? Because they did make us pieces of art. And it just depends on who you were, right? And what you look like. Because of course, if you were dark skinned, you were a piece of art out in the field, right? That's how they created us. That's what they wanted us to think we were good at. That's that benefit they've been talking about that we got from slavery. If you were lighter skinned, you were in the house. And, the whole connotation around the word nigger is just something different. But that statement, I was like, wow, this is very powerful. So what's the thought process behind that statement?
Go ahead, Val, because I think you wrote that. Yeah.
He always gives me credit. Every section. You wrote that. And I probably would argue that I didn't write that particular sentence. But the thing about Mammy is, and I think it's like a whole bunch of racist inventions. Racism is really, really profitable. It's probably the most profitable Western technology, right? We don't think about it like that. We think it's some kind, I don't know what we think it is. We tried to, years ago, Hoke and I tried to diagram racism, and this dog wants to be in the podcast, y'all. I mean, she's like in my face. We tried to diagram it, and it was very difficult because it's just too hard to figure out what it is. But if you think about the actual products of racism, one of the products is a figure like Mammy, and she's just not a real person. She's just not a human being. And it was funny because another friend, we sent this book out in the manuscript form to 100 people. And so we got all this feedback well before we ever moved to a place where we were getting it published. And one of the people we sent it to was a little bit upset after reading that entry, because he had someone who he didn't think of as a Mammy. Exactly. But he somehow recognized her in the description, and he was very upset because he was like, but she loved me. He could not imagine this person not loving him, which when we start writing about Mammy, we talk about how she was a whole, the woman is a whole person. She had a life outside of the service that she gave to the family, and he could not all of a sudden he was thinking he was reading a book about Black history, and then somehow he got implicated in it. And he had to challenge the way he understood his own experiences. And so that's what we're trying to do, is like give people, like you said, another way of viewing something you may have already heard of, you might be familiar with, you think you know, you think you understand. But when you encounter these categories and these, the way that we frame the people, you can then begin to say, oh, wait a minute, maybe I need to look at that again. Maybe I need to look at that differently. And so that's how, we couldn't leave a figure like Mammy out, because she's just too important to the way that the United States gets to be the United States.
Okay, so we have a comment, actually it's a question for you, Hoke. Did they create the art, or did they recognize its power and had no choice but to create the imagery to profit from it? Just what you said.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really intelligent question that they already sort of know the answer to it, right? I mean, that answer is already implied, And I mean, one of the things we try not to do, and we didn't do it in the book, is go down the rabbit hole of racism and white people. I mean, I always tell people we trap them in a section, and every Black history book should do that. Like, confine white people to the book in a particular section as compared to letting them, become a really important part of the discourse. So I think the questioner answers the question themselves. And then again, I just don't spend a lot of time at this stage of my life trying to figure out what white people, are doing or how they think or any of that. Yeah.
Or how they feel.
Yeah, it's just far too complicated. But I think there are patterns, and I think Mammy is one of those patterns, and the art is about those patterns that they create. And again, once we become sort of conscious of it as a pattern, I think we're in a position where we can, we can manage it. Yeah, but great question.
Okay, we have another comment here that says racism was/is profitable, as you said, Dr. V, and can be considered a mental illness based in their inadequacy and ineptness. That's good.
Yeah, it is good. And I think that's what we're getting at. That's why it's crazy as hell. Because somebody put some people on a boat. They sent them all the way away from their home. They put some chains on them and then said, "You're not a human being." That's crazy.
Exactly. Exactly. They say you 3/5.
Right. I mean, they eventually get to the 3/5 because they're trying to figure out a way to profit off of the people. But, the whole idea that somebody calls you a slave and you're supposed to internalize that and walk away and be like, oh, yeah, that's right. I'm not a woman. I'm a slave. That's crazy.
That is crazy as hell.
Yeah.
And so the inmate section, you talked about the inmate connection between slavery and the modern penal system. Talk to me a little bit about why that connection was made for the book. Hoke.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of it is that, we haven't talked about him yet, is, Reginald Dwayne Betts is really the reason that this book gets published. I met Reginald, and it's mentioned in the introduction, 6 months after he got out of prison. And now he runs a multi-million-dollar nonprofit called Freedom Reads, which has put 400 libraries in prisons to date. And he's probably slated to double that number within the next 2 or 3 years. And so, in my personal life, and he's a MacArthur Fellow, which is a big deal in some places in the world, you get like $800,000 to do research and do whatever you want. But I mean, it's a really personal relationship for me, because I just meet him on the humble here at Bowie State University. And it turns out that one of the, most brilliant, intelligent, dynamic, charismatic people that I know went to prison and happened to work for me for just a short amount of time. But he's the person that puts this book on the table. But the thing is that's part of African American phenomena, that Reginald is not an isolated instance of that. And so the inmate category in the book pays homage to that, you know what I mean? And we know this, you know what I mean, in a country that locks up as many Black people as this country is locked up. And then also the idea that we all came here locked up. You know, we all were in the prison of slavery. It's, you know, we have to acknowledge, you know, I mean, Black genius and intelligence, and it can't just simply be based on whether you abide by all of society's laws. We say in the runaway section, or maybe we don't, but it's something that's commonly said, is, I mean, the original crime, or the original way that every slave was down with breaking the law was running away to freedom, you know? So you become a criminal if you want to be free and you try and get away. So again, Malcolm, we're not going to say Eldridge, even though he was smart, but tragic in some different ways. Who's one other man? Etheridge Knight. But I mean, there's just the history of brilliant African Americans that have been in prison. And so, I mean, that's and that's part of what the book does, is we're trying to get at a different set of categories, a different way of looking at it. So to say Malcolm is brilliant and he went to prison is different than saying there's a category of brilliant, genius African Americans who have been to prison. There's a category of genius, brilliant African Americans who are now incarcerated. So that's the way that the book, even with those categories, is doing slick little things, giving us our dignity back. You know what I mean? It's saying, you know, part of this condition is that people can put these labels on us, and not just the label, but they can take your freedom from you. I mean, that's what they did with slaves. But just because they took your freedom does not mean that they have, you know, well, at least as long as we're conscious about it, they haven't denigrated our humanity. We still have the power to talk about genius, you know, in the work we do. So,
and I would offer, in addition to that, that you have to have some level of brilliance to be a criminal, right? Because especially if you are in a leadership role, right? I think about some of the big name gangsters, right? Who actually started gangs, right? They had to be brilliant to get people to follow them, to abide by the rules that they put in place, to commit the crimes that they needed them to commit, to sell the drugs. Like, they had to have some type of business savvy in order to be able to get people to do that, because a lot of people are just not going to follow anybody. And so they had to have some level of brilliance. Now, they didn't put it to good use, but they had to have some level of brilliance to be able to pull people together like that and get people to follow them, and not only follow them, but fear them, especially in our community, because we know we are, in a lot of instances, independent thinkers. We voice what we think verbally, right? And so if it's something going on that we don't necessarily agree with, chances are we're going to be the ones to speak up about it. And so in order for these people who are incarcerated, in some instances, there's just a level of brilliance as far as I'm concerned. And I think what has happened in the penal system is the more brilliant you are, the more time they give you to make sure that you don't get out and use that brilliance for something better for your community. That's just Sherelle's opinion. I don't have no proof on that, but I believe that.
The other piece about the incarceration is that people don't just go there and just be stuck there. People come and go. And it is a free Black space in a lot of ways. There's a lot of ideas. There's a lot of culture. There's a lot of stuff happening inside the walls, you know, that it's a back and forth. It's not, oh, they're gone. They're still part of the culture. And so that was another thing we were trying to acknowledge the role, the influence that people who have been incarcerated still or are incarcerated still play in our society and in our culture.
And that's a really good point, because somebody just came to my mind who is been locked up 50 plus years, right?
Wow.
And they are afraid to let this person out because they think that this person still has this huge influence. And I'm like, the people that you think they got influence over, they weren't even born when they got locked up, right? And the way that these kids have no discipline today, I'm not so sure that they still have that type of influence. But the people in power believe that they still have that influence, and so they won't let them out. And it's just crazy. I know a guy that I grew up with ended up killing somebody and been in jail since the 80s, right? Surely he has paid back society by now, over 40 something years, but they probably think that he's still a danger because it's easier to put those labels on us, particularly when they have us incarcerated. And
the profit, they've privatized the prison, so there is a profit motive behind keeping people in longer.
Okay, let's see what this says. I love the commentary about inmates and that their genius not being taken away due to imprisonment. Those individuals you mentioned who were imprisoned probably fueled their purpose and therefore genius. Yes. This next one is really close to my heart. When you talked about in the committed section about the mental illness and the lack of assistance in this country. To me, for us to be the most powerful, wealthy country on the planet, how in the world could we not have adequate resources available for people with mental illnesses, particularly once they turn 18 and above? Right? Because at that age, if they are not a danger to themselves or a danger to somebody else, there's nothing for this. There's no system for them, right? And so many of them end up being homeless because the families are not capable or skilled enough to deal with some of these severe mental illnesses. The first one that comes to my mind is schizophrenia, which I know you all talked about in the book. Schizophrenia, families are not prepared to deal with people who got schizophrenia, right? They don't have the skills. They haven't been educated on it. They don't know what to do or how to handle the people. And the people that have the mental illness, they, don't take their meds because they don't think they need it. They don't think there's anything wrong with them. And they're not necessarily a danger to themselves or anybody else, but they just have this mental illness that is hard to coexist with. And so a lot of them end up being homeless. And so what do you attribute to that from a Black history perspective as it relates to mental illness?
You want to take that, Hope?
I can. I think that's the thing is, and it's not part of the discussion in this book, but I'll just crack it open because I think the question, demands it is, I was called mentally ill in my old business by my business partner whose mother was a diagnosed schizophrenic. And I would argue that's what destroyed the business. To have somebody look at you who knows somebody that's mentally ill and call you mentally ill in a business is like putting COVID, up in a hospital where it's just going to breed and destroy everything. And so, for me, that's part of what the book comes out of, because I would also say metaphorically, the same thing occurs when white people look at you and say you're a slave. You have somebody that's mentally ill looking at you, calling you mentally ill if you say you free. So he uncoded that for me. The psyche of African Americans, who knows? I think that's what we do in the discipline of Black history is we're trying to figure out how it is Black people get to a healthy psyche. So if you ask the question about why did someone's psyche crack, I mean, that's like physics and science and STEM. I mean, who really knows, you know? And so we have this science or discipline of therapy, which has a certain set of actions, or it has a course to try and mend that psyche. But the fact that many African Americans' psyche has been cracked by its encounter with this system is absolutely predictable. And that's the weight that's on the Black scholar. You know, that's the weight of the Black intellectual. And I mean, if you look at Elijah Muhammad, when he says the white man is the devil, I mean, he healed like a whole bunch of people whose psyche was about to crack with that one simple statement. Because what he's saying is, I mean, again, this is the way this thing works, and then you the devil? Like, so that one little statement, and then an organization, whether you agree with the Nation of Islam or not, there's a platform and a resolution that allows somebody to heal, or at least get closer to healing, by saying, I can acknowledge that this shit is evil. I'm sorry, but this is evil. Yeah, but this is evil. And that I can root my psyche in a recognition of evil, like the people who oppress me root their psyche in a definition of evil. And so that question of how do we heal, how do we mend? And if I talk about my partner, I have no doubt in my mind the dude is mentally ill, but the question is how you heal him and how you keep a business running when you're doing it. So again, I think we don't know the answers to those questions, but your question is really about, I mean, the way forward. You know, I mean, that is the way forward. How do we heal Black people whose psyche has been, and I would argue it's not really fair to say it's just racism that does it. I mean, I would argue that gives white people too much power. The real issue is that when we get to the end of it, our definitions of humanity or sanity or what a healthy psyche is has to be handled independently of white people. Like, because because sooner or later we're going to exist as a society that's not dominated by racism or oppression. And really the way this Joan is we be bringing all this baggage, this unresolved with us. But again, those folks that have had to deal with that, I mean, they are the question. And I mean, I'd even go real spaceship and that's divinity, asking a question. You know, if God wants to teach you something or spirit wants to teach you something, it presents you with a problem. Faith is a question of, can you resolve it? You know, and with faith in whatever higher spirituality. So, you know, that you know, it's long and sort of convoluted, but I think a beautiful and brilliant question.
Now, I felt like you was talking about me in this section, the badass.
Oh yeah, I want to be in the badass section. Hell yeah, that's my section. Yeah.
Here's what stuck out to me in the badass section. If you don't know what you're doing, leave this one alone.
Exactly.
I love that. Also, the spin, and it's actually not even a spin, but the perspective that single mothers started in slavery. Hadn't thought about it that way, but that's exactly right. The way they were taking the men away or taking the women away, selling off people in the family and leaving the woman there left, you know, to take care of the kids until they took the kids away. And I was like, that is when single mothers started happening. So, who want to take this question about the single mamas started in slavery? Because the question is, how did you make that connection?
Well, I'll take it as a single mama in the room. Well, I mean, I don't know how we first come to the understanding. I think it's just because often what you talk about under slavery is rape, right? We talk about how the slave master takes advantage, and at some point it becomes really, really profitable for him. There's again another profit motive, particularly when we shift from tobacco to cotton in the plantation system, the economics of it requires, and then we've made the international slave trade illegal, and so then it encourages a domestic slave trade, from the upper South to the lower South. So those people in Virginia or wherever in Maryland, they may not need so many slaves to farm, so they send them down to the lower South. So, we got all of these things that are happening that make it profitable for the people who used to use people to work on a tobacco farm or some other industry to produce human beings as the commodity to trade in, right? And so if you don't have some bucks around or enough, or you just have the desire, whatever it is, you begin to just use your own self to make more people, right? So, and then at the same time, you deny your responsibility by acting like you're not the father. On the one hand, you're the patriarch because you are the master, right? And all of this belongs to you as some kind of great white father. But then on the other hand, you sell them off like they're not your children, and you start to create this mentality. And it's so bad that, if you're not even keeping proper records, who knows who's reproducing with whom, right? They could be siblings. They could be parent and child. They could be any kind of relationship. So it's all of this confusion that happens under, this really perverse institution that wants to turn people into chattel. So, that's part of it. And so there's like a natural logic that takes us, okay, well, we know that these people weren't permitted to raise and care for their children in a particular way. We know that in that being the men, right? They weren't permitted to raise and take care of their children. They were viewed as expendable. And we know that the welfare system seems to recreate a similar dynamic by denying the father's access to the home by, because if they're present, then that cuts the resources. So we can see, again, Hoke said earlier, patterns. What this book is about is not trying to be comprehensive. It's trying to recognize patterns and then identify the pattern and give it a name that we can all understand, and we can then properly name things. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to properly identify things so that we can get a handle on it.
Okay. Wow, it's already 7:27. But before we wrap this up, we got to talk about two more categories. One is the serial killers. And I know many people in my audience that live in the DMV area lived here when the sniper thing was happening. And I remember it very well because I just had my son, and my cousin was here helping me with the baby, and we didn't go outside because we were like, oh no. I was so glad I didn't have to go to work during that time. The sniper, of course, we were all shocked when we found out that the snipers were Black. And so we don't typically think of serial killers because it's typically not us, but it's some of us, but not typically Black people. And then the silent Black people, I love that because they are, in some instances, just as dangerous to us as those that are loud and boisterous. That's on the other side of the aisle, right? Because going forward, particularly in this type of climate that we're about to enter into, it's going to be important for us all to not only stick together, but to speak out. not be silent, not be complacent, not approach these next years as I'm gonna be all right and good luck to you. I hope you're gonna be okay too. But if you're not, don't come over here asking me for no help, right? We have to figure out how do we get the silent Black people on board to join in the adventure. I'm gonna call it an adventure because that's what it's gonna be. Join in the adventure of getting our community healthy, right? And getting our minds right, getting our souls right, getting our spirits right. How do we get the silent Black people to join us? Hope.
Can I respond to that real quick? And then I'm going to let Hoke, because I know he's got something to say about this, but I want to respond with a brief story. So there was this, I write plays sometimes. And I was part of a group, and they were supposed to produce something I wrote. And the artistic director got in a fight with the producer. It just all fell apart. But in the middle of it falling apart, there was racial tension, right? Mm-hmm. And this organization was presenting itself as being very inclusive and all of this stuff. They were advertising at the work that Black women had done to pave the way. They were using it to market and advertise themselves, but they really weren't doing any of this work. They were, in fact, perpetuating the same old. Mm-hmm. So we're in the middle of this thing falling apart, and the Black producer is telling me, we gotta charge forth. We gotta make sure they understand why we're leaving. And I said, well, I can imagine that some people were in the fields one day, and then they looked up and was looking at the stars and charting the path. And the next day, people were like, she didn't say nothing. She was just gone. I don't know where she went. And she might have taken some folk with her. Mm-hmm. So it's like, to me, this is the yin. This is the yin. And then I'm going to stop talking, because I think, I do a disservice if I start talking about Black yin, if Hoke Glover is sitting right here and can speak, because he can speak about it. If I learned anything, I learned that from him.
Okay. Hoke?
Oh, yeah. I was just going to say, the beauty of the book is it can be read in a lot of different ways, And so part of what I take from your comment is that some silent Black people need to speak up. My take on that is some Black people need to shut the hell up.
I agree.
I agree. It always works both ways,
Absolutely.
So for me, and I'm saying the beauty of your comment for me is, I'm not thinking about the people that need to speak up. I'm thinking about the people that need to shut the hell up. And I'm thinking about my ancestors who were quiet when I was running my mouth, my dad in particular. And then later on, I saw a certain sense of resilience and power, and perhaps I misjudged them and thought they didn't know what I knew because they didn't say it. But then later on, I realized some of the things I'm learning now, they probably knew, which is why they never said it. So again, I think the beauty of the book is, and the beauty of every book is that it can be read from different angles and different approaches. And that's what I've learned with China, is just that it's just not stagnant, it's dynamic. And so we got our ways of entering. And the important thing is we enter in one way, and then we reconcile it with what we learn and what we're dealing with, and then we read it another way. So, it's a beautiful short book. You can read it in one sitting. And so I always encourage people to read it again. And because it's fun, you might actually be able to do that. You watch the same TV show again, listen to the same song again. We made a simple Black history book that you can read again and again and again. And each time you read it, and because it's easy, because you can enjoy parts of it, you get a different slant, you get a different idea, and you see that, it's deep and you got a way of entering, but it gets deeper and deeper and deeper. So that's what we're trying to do. So I appreciate that comment on that.
Question in this comment section is, how can they purchase the book? Dr. V.
Anywhere you buy your books, it's available. I mean, you can order it online. I mean, it's published by W.W. Norton. I don't think it's the cheapest way to buy it is to go to their website, but it's available. Even if your bookstore doesn't have, they can get it. I always love to support independent bookstores, but it's published by Norton, and they have distribution, so it can be purchased anywhere.
And if people want to do what I did, I downloaded it to my Kindle from Amazon. So
Yeah.
there you have it. So time has gone by really quickly. Thank you all so very much for coming on here to talk about this book. I really enjoyed it. I'm going to ask you to sit tight for me. I'm going to do my what the hell segment. And then we're going to wrap this up. So thank you, Dr. V, and thank you, Hoke. Dr. Yao, I love that name. I just want you to know that.
Okay.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you for having us. Yep.
All right, so let's talk about what the hell. What the hell is going on in this country? You know, Luigi, Luigi, or whatever his name is, Manassoni, you know, the guy who killed the CEO of United Healthcare. What the hell? You know, as I've been following the story and I'm listening to people talk about how disgusted they are that some people are not necessarily celebrating the death of this gentleman who passed away, but celebrating the fact that somebody finally took matters into their own hands to deal with and put a spotlight on how terrible our healthcare system is in this country. Now, I don't think people are necessarily celebrating. Well, some people were celebrating his death, but I don't think that's cool at all. It did make me say, what the hell? But I see that now that the initial shock has passed, they've arrested him at the McDonald's and they have him in custody. I'm starting to hear the conversation change. And the conversation is changing to asking these CEOs, what are you going to do different going forward? And the CEOs, they're scrambling right now, trying to figure it out, especially since they saw some of their pictures up in New York City. And one of them had an X on it for the CEO of United Healthcare. They are now starting to understand, well, they understood before, but they are now starting to think about their own safety and the safety of their family members. And so I don't agree with violence under any circumstances, unless it's self-defense. However, you do have to ask yourself, what the hell? Why does it have to take for somebody, a citizen, a young man who had a bright future, to just snap and decide that he was going to take somebody's life to put a spotlight on this issue? We have to do better in this country. There is no reason why anybody in this country does not have quality health care. And as much as we pay for health care, for the insurance companies to be denying us access to medications, to surgeries, and all of that, you know, we have to ask ourselves, what the hell? Why are we paying all this money if we can't get what we need? Also, another thing that made me ask myself this week about this, what the hell, is why does it cost $5 to make medications, but in some instances, the people are charging us $1,000 for that medication? That's a hell of a markup. So what the hell? What are we going to do? We as citizens, we're going to have to find a non-violent way to force these people who are part of the 1% in our country, who wakes up every day and their main goal in life is to suck the American people dry. What the hell? We have to do better. There is no excuse. We have to do better. But guess what? Starting January 2025, right around the 20th, we're going to really say what the hell when they start talking about taking away the Affordable Care Act, because many people who voted for that side didn't realize that the Affordable Care Act was the same as Obamacare. And so now they are in a tizzy. They're frantic. They're trying to figure out how they going to have health insurance? Well, let me be the one to tell you, you're not going to have it because you won't be able to afford it. And when they dismantle the Affordable Care Act, you can think yourself and you can sit at your house and say, what the hell was I thinking when I placed my vote in this last election? Thank you all for joining me today. Thank my guests for being here. I appreciate you all. And I will be back in January. Look out for the upcoming announcements. Have a great day. Thank you for joining and participating in Let's Get Into It. I want to thank my special guests for being brave enough to get into it. Without you, these conversations cannot happen. Remember, different viewpoints, respect, and love are the foundations of Let's Get Into It. If there's a topic you think I should discuss, drop me a recommendation. If you're interested in being my special guest, let me know because we can and will get into it. Have a great day on purpose, and I look forward to your continued engagement and support as we get into it.